Hey guys, this is Charles Yeager with Metal. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at the Primitivz Effect that's a part of Mantra VR. Alright, inside of After Effects, I'm going to come to the Effects and Presets panel and type in VR. That's going to toggle all of the Mantra VR effects. I'm going to select the Mantra VR Primitivz Effect and apply it to my 360 footage. Now the Mantra VR Primitivz Effect is very powerful and it's kind of under the radar compared to some of these other effects, but what it can do, essentially, it's like the Chrome Spheres effect, but with a lot more options and shapes to choose from. So let's come over here and look at some of the effect settings here. First of all, we have frame layout for monoscopic and stereoscopic footage. And you're going to see a couple options grayed out here if you have monoscopic footage because they're only for stereoscopic footage. And I'll come back to those at the end of this tutorial. Next, we have the actual primitive that we want to work with. So I'm just going to zoom in here and you can see we're working with a sphere right now. And you can see there's quite a few different primitives you can select from. So I'll go ahead and select a cube. And I'm actually going to go ahead and rotate the cube here just so we can kind of see it a little bit more in 3D space. So it is a fully 3D object inside of this effect. And now we can go ahead and look at some of the other primitives here. We have a tetrahedron. So it's a triangle shape. Then we have an octahedron. So it's kind of like a diamond type shape here. Go ahead and rotate this. Next we have the icosahedron, which looks like one of those multi-numbered dies that you see sometimes. Then we also have a rod shape, and you can see kind of like a cylinder. Then we have a plane, just a flat plane. And then finally we have the sphere again. Next option we have is the point of interest, and that's going to be the center point for whatever shape we have or whatever primitive we're using. You can see I can just click and drag to move that around the scene. Next we have the actual distance, and this actually is distance from our virtual camera. So I can go ahead and move this closer to the camera. You can see as I pull that closer, and if I continue to bring it closer, it actually will collide with the camera. You can see how it's a solid color now. And then we can also move this further away in the distance, as you can see there. So it's very easy to keyframe an object coming to and from the camera. And as you've seen, I've been working with the tilt, pan, and the roll. I'll go ahead and change this back to a cube so we can kind of see this a little bit better. So you can use this to rotate your primitive object. Next we have these scale options, which are on the X, Y, and Z. So this is really powerful. So if you want to work with something that's a cube-like shape, but not necessarily completely uniform, you can go ahead and adjust the scaling here. You can see how it's going to change the shape. And you can see it has the distortion there because it's obviously equirectangular footage. But if we go ahead and jump into the Metal Globe preview, we can get a better idea of what we're looking at. So now it's like we're looking at a rectangle shape on our footage. So you could use this to build various shapes by adjusting the scaling. I'm going to go ahead and reset the effect now, and I'll select back a cube object. Then you're going to see some other tabs down here. We have the material, environment, and distribution. So I'll just go ahead and check down the material options, and we have a list of material options that we have down here. First being the color. So I'm going to go ahead and select this, and I can adjust the color of the primitive object. You can see. Next we have texture. So if you have a texture in your composition, you can actually select that and apply it to whatever primitive objects you're using. Just to demonstrate this, I'm going to go ahead and select a texture for my project, add it to my composition. I'm just going to put it below my actual footage. You can see the texture here. I'm just going to put it below there. Then I'm going to go back to my effects and controls and select my footage with the Primitivz effect on it. And for texture, I'll just go ahead and select that texture I added in. And now we can see that is projected on the model. Now I have a few options for the texture mapping. The default is model, and that's probably going to look the best for any of the objects you're using because it is mapping that texture specifically to that model you have chosen. But we have a few other options here, such as local equirectangular and global equirectangular. Now in order to see these best, I'm going to add some more of these cubes in here with the distribution. I'll cover the distribution more at the end. But I'm just going to increase this a little bit here for the number of instances so we can kind of see what's happening with these various texture mapping methods. So I'm going to close that back up. And for the texture mapping, I'm going to select local equirectangular. And you can see it's going to apply more of an equirectangular mapping of that texture to each of these cubes. And sometimes, depending on the shapes you're working with, this may look better. You may prefer it over the model texture. And then if we go to the global equirectangular, you're going to see it's applying that texture to all of the objects as a global equirectangular texture. So you can see it's really been scaled up and it's scaling across all the different cubes. I'm going to go ahead and set this back to model. And now we can run through some of these other texture settings such as ambient light. So you can go ahead and increase this. It'll make them brighter or lower. And then we have the diffuse. So you can see it's darkening up the texture there, making that brighter. And next we have specular. You can adjust the specular reflections. Shininess as well. I'm actually going to go ahead and turn off that texture just so we can see this a little bit better just on this flat color here for some of these settings. Next we have roughness. You can see it's going to kind of add a little bit of a matte texture there, especially with the reflectivity and the shininess when we increase the roughness. And then finally we have reflectivity. If I go ahead and increase this, we'll get that mirror-like texture. If I go all the way to 100%, it's completely like a mirror. But if I set it a little bit lower, you can see we still get a little bit of that color cast. Now I'm going to come back over here, and I'm actually going to change this color back to a gray color. And I'm going to lower the reflection all the way back down just so when we get into the environment settings here. So now I'm going to toggle down the environment settings. And we have a few other options here, such as environment map. If we want a specific environment map to reflect on our shapes that's different than the one we have natively. And we also have a couple other options such as intensity, color bleeding, and draw background. So first one I want to show you is the draw background option. If I go ahead and uncheck this, you're going to see it's going to remove our background. Now there's our texture back there. I'm actually going to turn that off as well. But you're going to see this is just going to be over an alpha channel now. And so this allows you to composite this over other 360 footage if you wanted to, or in any case you wanted the background to be disabled. Next we have the color bleeding, and by default it's at 70. But I wanted to show you this. You can see as I adjust this, if I bring this all the way down, you can see it really kind of pulls out all of the saturation of the colors from whatever equirectangular image we've applied this effect to. So you can see there's very much a blue tone on our 360 footage. And right now the cubes, they don't really look like they're composited into that scene. But if I go ahead and increase the color bleeding, you're going to see they're going to start to get a blue tint to them. If I pull this all the way up to 100%, you can see they have a much more bluish tint that matches our 360 footage a lot better, and again helps with the overall composite. And if you're mapping this to a different environment map, it will update depending on what environment map you're using. And just to demo that, I'll go ahead and show you here. I'm going to pull in some other footage. I've got this forest clip, which is very orange, so it's going to be a nice contrast to this blue tinted footage. I'm going to pull in the forest clip and just apply it underneath my regular 360 footage. And I'll come back to the effects here. And for environment map, I'm going to go ahead and select that forest clip. And now you can see the cubes kind of have an orange accent on them. And actually, if I go ahead and increase the reflectivity now, we're going to see that we have that forest scene reflected on our cubes. And if I go ahead and adjust the rotation here, we can see it's actually reflecting that environment kind of like it's in 3D. And if you just want to reflect the actual scene that you've applied the Primitivz Effect to, you can just leave this set on none, and that'll default back on that original 360 footage you applied the effect to. Now finally, let's go ahead and look at some of the distribution options down here, which will allow you to add in more instances of the cubes. You can see as I increase the instances here, and you can select from different distribution types such as Fibonacci or circle, and you can see they're all going around our 360 footage. If I look around here in the global preview, we have those circling around our footage. And of course, we have other options. Over here, I'm going to change this back to Fibonacci, such as the latitude. If we want all of the cubes to converge on one latitude of our 360 and then have them merge to the other side, you have control of that. And we also have rotate around the point of interest. And then some scaling options such as incremental scale, which will scale the cubes depending on the point of interest again. And then scale deviation, which is just a random scale deviation. And then position deviation to randomize their position a little bit more. And distance deviation, which is another additional option you typically don't see in the distribution controls, but is unique to the Primitivz Effect. And finally, we have random seed down here to randomly change up the positioning of the cubes. Now very briefly, I do want to show you the Primitivz Effect applied to stereoscopic footage. So I'm going to go ahead and apply the Primitivz Effect to the stereo clip I have. And I'm going to select for the frame layout to be stereoscopic. Right now the circle's at the very top of the view, so right now if I go ahead and click and select to move this around, we can actually see the sphere reflected here a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and increase the number of instances so we can see some of the stereo disparity options that we have. So I'm just going to increase this up a little bit. And so again, we have this stereo disparity option. So as we increase this, it's going to offset. You can see how it's offsetting the top and the bottom where the spheres are positioned. And that's going to add that 3D effect onto our 360 footage to make them look like they're a little bit closer to the camera or to the user that's viewing the video. However, we have another option up here, which is stereo subdivisions. And this is very important when you're working with stereo footage and you're working on the stereo disparity option. So with the stereo subdivisions, think of it as it's slicing up, subdividing our Primitivz Effect into however many slices we set this to. And typically you're going to want to increase this as much as you can. Now it can affect render quality and stuff like that. But the more subdivisions you have, the better looking the stereo disparity is going to reflect on the final output. And the reason for that is the more objects you have in your scene here with lower stereo subdivisions, it can result in some artifacting if you're not careful. And just to demonstrate that, I'm going to pull the subdivisions here down really low. And we're going to start to see a little bit of lines appearing. You can see these slices, because what it's doing is it's subdividing each of these projections of the Primitivz Effect on the top and the bottom. And because it's subdividing it, so it makes it actually look like it's in 3D space. So if you had a ton of different spheres on your shot, you could potentially start running into some of these artifacts, even at higher levels if you're not careful. You can see as I increase that, it's going to divide it so much that it's not really going to be noticeable. If we push that all the way up to 200, we're not going to be able to see any visible subdivisions on this particular effect right now because we're only using 10 instances, so it's relatively low. But if you increase this up really high with like 50 for each one of these, you could run into some problems where the subdivisions will become visible. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, guys, hopefully you picked up some tips using the Primitivz Effect. I think it's a really cool effect. Definitely going to be used for 360 music videos and abstract things like that. All right, guys, it's been Charles Yeager for Metal. Thanks for watching.